Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
Believe it or not, this week I'm annoyed.
I'm in a pretty good mood, so I don't know what's happening here, but...
A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Southwest and the fact that it had canceled 16,000 flights over the Christmas holidays. What I made note of was that the Secretary of Transportation said that he was going to launch inquiries into what happened there. So we've got politicians jumping to the front of the parade saying they're going to fix whatever the problem was. As I understand it, Southwest has antiquated software and scheduling systems. This contributed to the problem. But I said at the time, look, where does the Secretary of Transportation get off saying he's going to investigate Southwest when, as far as I know, things like Amtrak are under the purview of the Secretary of Transportation? Nobody's investigating why they can't manage to be on time. But that was just kind of an off-the-cuff comment. And then a couple of days ago, there was another major outage caused by antiquated software that caused 13,000 flight cancellations across the country. Who's responsible? The FAA. What do you not hear? The Secretary of Transportation calling for some inquiry into the FAA. We seem to have this double standard regarding government endeavors and private sector endeavors. When the private sector messes up, as it will, it's composed of human beings, everybody loses their minds. We're going to sue, we're going to have inquiries, and that's okay. I don't have any problem with that. My problem is that when the government messes up to the same degree, we just kind of shrug and say, well, they meant well. They'll do it better next time.
That's exactly right. We hear crickets because people think that the government means well, but businesses aim to make people's lives less wonderful.
Yeah, and that I don't understand. Ask any...
That somehow business is blameworthy.
Yeah, well, ask any business owner what's your attitude toward your customers, and any good business owner is going to tell you that the customers are his lifeblood. And if he can't make them happy, he's got major problems.
That's right. He's not going to have to worry about customers much longer if he doesn't have the right attitude about customers.
Yeah.
That people keep thinking these things about business is baffling. Why? Because they deal with these businesses every day. For the most part, they think that they're quite wonderful. How do I know this? They keep going back. They give money to these people, and then the next week, they do it again. And you wouldn't do this if the people taking your money weren't delivering something close to what you need them to deliver. Now, I do business enough with enough different people to know that it doesn't always work. There are always going to be problems around the edges. How do you address these things? Well, you stop doing business with people who have these problems repeatedly. But when you're faced with a problem like this from a company that's always done pretty well by you, you typically just say, hey, guys, you got to do better than this. And if you do that the right way, or in fact, even the wrong way, I like doing it on Twitter, because that's where companies actually have their best customer service representatives. So do I complain on Twitter? Yeah, you bet. Why? Because it works.
Right.
And, will I do business again with businesses that I've had trouble with? Yeah, sure. Because I know that they're trying to do a great job, and sometimes they just fall a little short.
And that's interesting because you do that, and of course we've all seen many people get on Twitter and complain, and the company comes along and makes it right pretty quickly, as a matter of fact. But have you ever seen anybody do that with government? To get on there and say, my mail wasn't delivered, or my Amtrak train is 4 hours late, and just get on in response and say, we're going to make this right.
No, of course not.
Typically, you'll hear nothing.
We all know the reason why, and they don't have an incentive to do so.
And I think that's the important thing. It's not that people in the public sector are somehow inferior to private sector workers. It's the same type of human being. It's an incentive that you can walk away and take your dollars with you where the private sector is concerned. But you can't walk away and take your dollars with you where the government's concerned.
I mean, you can try, but then they'll charge you for crimes and they'll throw you in jail and they'll confiscate a good portion of your wealth. And look, we live here and this is the reality that we face. People, for the most part, come to terms with it. Government, not really terribly efficient, not terribly responsive, not really the tool for most jobs. And yet people give government a free pass. Why? They meant well. They tried to fix it. Well, nobody tells me that it's okay that I meant well. People care that I deliver results. And if government's not delivering results, it's time to notice that that has been the pattern, and maybe you're expecting things that the government will never deliver, given its nature. Maybe it's an uncomfortable conclusion because you're left saying, well, I guess now we have to find another way.
Well, I'll tell you a short story that happened to me this past week. It's a good story about government, actually. I was asked to go to Harrisburg and make a presentation to the Pennsylvania Treasurer, Stacey Garrity, on economic freedom. I went in there expecting, as usual in these things, there's going to be a room of 20 to 50 people, and I give my talk and take Q&A and go about my business. And in fact, it wasn't. We were sitting around a table. There were maybe 5 of us there.
Oh, that's fantastic.
The treasurer, a couple of deputy treasurers, chief of staff, these sorts of things. So was it in my analysis of economic freedom in the 50 states, showing that states that are more economically free perform better on all sorts of metrics. Given that it's a room full of politicians or bureaucrats and me, and we're all sitting around this table, I'm treading lightly, as you can imagine. And I'm treading lightly, and I'm sensing that Treasurer Garrity is, I don't want to say annoyed, but seems like she has something to say and she's not saying it. We get to a break in this talk where she's inserting a question, and her question is pushing me, saying, look, there are better things about economic freedom you're not saying here.
That doesn't seem right.
Well, it turns out she has a distinguished career in the military. She's a retired U.S. Army Reserve colonel, comes from business, understands how business works and the incentives that are involved, but at the same time is interested in doing the best job she can for the state in her position. From time to time, I've had experiences like this with bureaucrats, with politicians, where I encounter some people who really, honestly, not only are they smart and capable, they really are trying to do the best job they can. And more often than not, they're people like the people at that table who aren't career politicians, bureaucrats. Rather, they've come over from business. A couple of the people there had come from academia as well. They've got a much broader perspective of how human behavior works than what someone who only spends their career in politics would understand.
Well, that sounds kind of like a nice afternoon.
It was a really fun afternoon. It was.
I also want to talk about politicians. You know, look, I'm a political scientist. We do this podcast. I work for the American Institute for Economic Research, and I run all of their public-facing editorial content. You might be surprised to learn that I don't really pay attention to the United States or any other kind of politics with any great regularity. I just don't care.
Really? That's straight. That's like me not paying attention to the economy. What's going on there?
It is and it isn't. I don't care about the granularity of the movements of American politicians. What I care about is the system that the framers gave us and how well that works. This Speaker of the House business didn't seem so great. It took the Republicans, 15 shots to get a Speaker of the House? Something that they should have been able to take care of in about a half an hour.
What was the problem there? I didn't follow any of that.
There was a group of representatives who weren't going to get behind somebody that they perceived as antithetical to their point of view. They, as a group, maintained their cohesion, something that's extraordinarily difficult to do when favors are being doled out. They had to come to a massive compromise where the new Speaker of the House is probably showing up as the weakest speaker ever. Made all kinds of concessions to these people and other people, as the case may be. But that's not the important part, right? The important part is that it was extraordinarily difficult for the Republicans to manage getting a speaker, something that literally should have taken 20 minutes. You just looked at who was the leader of the party in the House prior to the election. It's that guy. That's how these things work. But not so fast there, partner. So the House is a mess. What's up with Joe Biden and all these documents that they keep finding in his personal spaces? He's got secret documents everywhere. There's so many of them that his own attorneys are saying, okay, we found more.
You said Biden. Do you mean Trump?
I don't mean Trump. We could say Trump, and it would be exactly as true, but I don't mean Trump at all. I mean Joe Biden saying, but with me, it's different. No, it's not. Above and beyond that, we get a story coming out of The Atlantic, which I find endlessly fascinating, that indicates that the Supreme Court justices are all cranky with each other. They're all angry about all kinds of things that all of them have been up to. So what have we got? We've got a House that can't organize itself. We've got a Supreme Court that can't stop sniping at each other, and a president who, after yelling about how terrible Donald Trump was for having classified information at his personal residence, come to find out Joe could wallpaper his personal residence with the classified information that he's got in it. Everywhere I look, I see a government that is barely functioning. This is exactly what I want to see. If we could make the Senate a bleeding mess next, that'd be great. This is just fantastic. A bunch of weeks ago, when the Republicans first started trying to get a Speaker of the House, one of our listeners, a guy over in England, sent a story from BBC. You know, the BBC was looking at the Americans with great wonder, not sensing what was wrong with us, that it could be going like this, And I thought, yes, the BBC is very confused because this is literally the best possible outcome. If we in 2 years still don't have a speaker, yes, sadly, all good things must come to an end. It's becoming more like the government I want, dysfunctional, unable to do idiotic things except, go after your gas stove, which I'm here to tell you is never going to work. Everybody in the United States heard that and said, you know what? No way. And that's exactly what you want to hear, right? Because that's not typically what you hear when regulation is proposed. Everybody knows they overstepped and they're going to have to walk this one back. I'm looking around and I'm liking what I see.
How about that? James is happy about government.
Yeah, it doesn't seem right at all. Which brings us to the foolishness of the week. And you might recall there was a new president over at CNN. And he said, we're going to make CNN a serious news organization again.
Yes.
And I said, no, that CNN is a serious news organization again if and when they fire Don Lemon. But wait, there's more, because they're on to a new idea. And the president's name is Chris Licht, Licht. He's got that 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. slot, which is actually quite important in the cable news universe. He wants to hire, quote, a news entertainment personality.
Oh, come on, news entertainment?
He means comedian. They're going to hire a comedian. The following names have been floated, and it doesn't appear that any of them are necessarily all that likely. But these are the names they're talking about. Bill Maher, Trevor Noah, Arsenio Hall, and Jon Stewart. This is the new CNN, the serious CNN.
You know what you're going to end up with here. It's comedy routines that are based on whatever the latest news is.
That's right. It's going to be every bit as funny as Saturday Night Live is, except a person in the world who was ever able to do that job is Johnny Carson, and Johnny is long gone. You want to be a serious news operation? Run the news. Do some investigative journalism. Not the gotcha kind, but the kind that actually makes a difference. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, these are all clown shows.
Yeah, but it's not their fault. They're delivering what the customers want.
That's right. It's our fault. Not only do you get the politics you deserve, you get the media you deserve too.
Yep.
A pox on all of them.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. If you're a full-time college student looking for something educational, fun, and free, apply to join me and James and several faculty who have appeared on Words and Numbers at the inaugural summer seminar on the theory and practice of classical liberalism. The week-long seminar is hosted by the Stevenson of Classical Liberalism. The week-long seminar is hosted by the Stevenson Institute at Wabash University and will be held June 5th through the 10th. There's no charge, and meals and lodging are provided. To apply, see the link in the show notes. Patrick McPike asks, what is a realistic strategy to counteract the Ratchet effect, the tendency for government to only ever get bigger?
Comparing it to a ratchet that turns only in one direction. It's progressivism. Click, click, click. Conservatism. Let's not click for a while.
Right, yeah. Only click once instead of 3 times.
Notice what doesn't happen. We don't unclick things, right?
Yeah.
I think any rational person would be able to scan the activities of government over the last couple hundred years and see that that's very obviously true. So the question becomes, is there a way to get past that? Is there a way to dial things back? And I wonder, Because if there were, we'd have surely stumbled upon it by now.
Well, I think one of the problems here is people, particularly people in libertarian circles, have a tendency to look for a magic wand. If only the Constitution said this, if we had line item vetoes, or if total government spending was constitutionally constrained, if only that, we'd solve the problem. And the fact is, it doesn't matter what the Constitution says. If people are going to ignore it, they're going to ignore it, regardless of whether it has your particular language or not.
If we say that it will henceforth be illegal to run a budget deficit, what happens if we're on pace to come in exactly at budget and then some sort of natural disaster occurs? Do we not respond to it? Would that be the sensible thing? If a foreign country invades Canada and are massing on the Canadian border to our north, do we not take steps to make sure that we nip that in the bud? There's no way around these sorts of problems. Having said that, I could give you a way that we would never have a budget problem again. And that would always be absent these kinds of over-the-top problems. It would be this simple. The budget will be balanced. If the budget is not balanced, everybody in Congress goes to prison. Trust me, the budget would be balanced. Now, all of a sudden, you'd have people asking questions like, is a balanced budget a particularly good idea? And that's a reasonable question to ask. I don't mean to dismiss that question. There are all kinds of things that I think would throw us out of balance, but would still keep us well within tolerance. It would just have to be matched exactly as often and by exactly as much of us coming in under budget. You know, like grown-ups do when they deal with the messy real world. You're never going to be perfect. The federal government is only over, only by a ton, and never under, never even by a penny.
I think there is one way to achieve this. And maybe it's not a reversing of the ratchet, but it's a compensation for it. And that is to have separate countries. All right, you've got the United States, and there's no way to reverse the ratchet, but the ratchet only affects the people within the confines of the United States economy. So you run budget deficits, you start printing money, you get inflation. All that's going to be harming people within the United States, people who hold the dollar. People in some other country, they operate by different rules, they're fine.
They never really appreciated the intrusion of a bunch of foreigners into American politics. And yet there was this one night, U2 was picking endlessly on the first George Bush administration. They would call the White House from the stage every night. They were really sticking a knife into him every time they had a chance. It always rubbed me the wrong way until one night when Bono said, when you in America elect your president, he's all of our president. We just don't get a say in the matter. And that's not wrong. There's something that's right enough about that you have to take it seriously. Now, if the United States took to minding its own business and didn't intrude into the affairs of other countries, I think you could wave your hand at that kind of criticism.
Look in the other direction. The way to entrench the ratchet effect is to have a world government, to have a world currency, because then there's no way out. Any country can start ratcheting up and everybody's going to have to bear the pain of this. And you want an example of this? Look at Greece in its meltdown some years ago.
That's right. Look at the European Union, right, where Germany has to cover Greece's bills year in and year out.
Yes.
Progressives might say, well, that's the cost of living in communion with cover Greece's bills year in and year out.
Yes.
Progressives might say, well, that's the cost of living in communion with other human beings. But why is that the cost for German citizens who are trying to have jobs and to get by and support their families? Why is what's happening in Greece their fault? It gets real ugly where politics and economics merge. If you want a surefire path to real political problems, consolidate power under one world government.
And if you want to make it easier for a country like Greece to ratchet up its government, force a country like Germany to bear the burden of it.
It's nice when we in the United States can say, well, go deal with it yourself. You made your problem. And I have no problem when other countries tell us exactly that when we're looking at the problems of our own making, right? It seems only fair and reasonable that people should be on the hook for their own self-inflicted problems. And yet people who should know better wave their hand at reality and say, yeah, but how you can leave, say, the state of Connecticut if you can't afford to live there anymore, typically in your retirement. And where do you go? Well, Georgia for one place, or the Carolinas, places that are just cheaper. And Connecticut, realizing that this was happening, decided they were going to confiscate the wealth of people who moved out of state. Thankfully, the American political system yielded that response. You can't do that. And if you want to retain people, you better give them a better deal. And if you don't, they're going to leave.
Ian Robert asks, how do you talk to people who disagree with you on politics?
I yell at them.
You'd be bald and angry.
Where the hell has Ian Robert been all these years? Look, this becomes an issue over the holidays when all kinds of people who believe all kinds of things show up at your house. And you have to realize that politics isn't the most important thing all the time. Sometimes it's okay not to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And people who don't want to talk about sports love talking about whatever they watched on TV last week.
I'd give Ian some practical advice here. A couple of places I see people consistently going wrong when they have conversations like this is they use the word you. When you're talking about a topic, talk about the topic and never say to the other person, well, you think X. You're just asking, put the guy's hackles up, and you're probably wrong about what you're saying to begin with.
And when you're talking about political things, I've always found that pronouns really do matter. And the pronoun we is way better than the pronoun you. Look, I'm a political philosopher by training, and political philosophy is reducible to one question. What should we do?
Mm-hmm.
It's the great normative question. Collectively, we are going to have to do something, but what? There's a lot that goes into answering that very simple question. What should we do? It's something that we share, whether we want to do. It's something that we share, whether we want to or not, regardless of who we think might have caused any number of our different problems. The fact of the matter is that they are our problems. If they are first-person plural problems, then first-person plural pronouns should control throughout. It's an illustration of goodwill. I think that when we answered the question thusly, we made mistakes. We tried it, it didn't work out, and now we have to try something else. And look at the recursion to that first person over and over and over again. It has the net effect of bringing people to understand that we are in this together, and goodwill is actually assumed and has to be.
Andrew Wanrose asks, who, alive or dead, would you like to have on the show?
I'd like to yell at Jesus for a while.
I'd take it as a given that whoever it is, you're going to be yelling at them.
Oh, no, I would love to hang out with Winston Churchill. I got nothing to yell about with Winston Churchill. I got nothing to yell about with Winston Churchill. That'd be great. Winston Churchill saved the West, and in so doing, saved the world entire. Was he a deeply flawed individual? You bet he was. Other people I want to call to task for what their followers have done in their name. Thus, my knee-jerk reaction to get Jesus on the show. I think he'd be horrified by what a lot of his followers do. I would love to have my grandfather on. He died when I was like 7 or 8 years old. I barely remember him. What was life like for him? Right? He was a working class guy who worked in the brass mills in Waterbury, Connecticut. A couple of weeks before he retired, he had bought his first new car of his entire life, a Volkswagen Bug of all things, and was to take delivery of it a month or so down the road. Walked into the nurse's office, said, I don't feel so good, and dropped dead on the floor at work. I would like to talk to him about what life was like and what we take for granted now.
Julius Caesar, Henry VIII, somebody who we look back on and say, wow, that guy was really wealthy. Have him come today and talk to people about how wealthy he was compared to how wealthy poor people are today in the United States.
Tell me about these smartphones. What the hell is that? You mean poor people have a device that connects them to literally every other human being on the planet?
Tom James asks, how much has political corruption changed over time?
I don't think it's changed all that much, frankly. If anything, it might be a little better now than it's been in the past. When you look at what communications technology, the kind of sunlight that brings to certain practices of corruption, it mitigates things. I'm not Pollyannish enough to say that things are great and we've solved this problem. As long as human beings are interacting, you will have a corruption problem. I just think it's harder to call into effect schemes that would really be harmful to a lot of people. I just think it's harder to call into effect schemes that would really be harmful to a lot of people. And it may just be the case that we've ended up at a place where we're all so much richer by definition now that it's just less important to be corrupt. Now it's a matter of being corrupt in order to really rake it in over everybody else, where once upon a time it was to do somewhat better than everybody else. When you think about Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters, how rich were these people? Not that rich. They did better than they should have had they been playing by honest rules. But it's not like they all had a golf course out in their backyard and a swimming pool in the basement. Do I think that corruption is an ongoing problem? I do, and I think it always will be. But it seems to be becoming less of one with each passing year, as generally speaking, we all do better. I made fun of you a little bit at the beginning, but truth be told,
it's an opportunity to riff on topics that we might not get to in the normal day-to-day.
It's nice to learn what people are thinking. It allows me to think about things that I wasn't probably going to think about. That's always a bit of a blessing. On that happy note, let's call it a day. In the meantime, Ant, I hope you had a really nice New Year, and I'll see you next week.
See you next week, James.